welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This week we're at episode 207, and Mike, give us a status update on the CD situation over there.
Well, the new house CD situation, I have just filed away all of the jazz recordings, and I found some, as always, some recordings I bought, long ago, a few years ago, sometimes even as many as 8 or 9 years ago, that I forgot I had, and I just put them back on and just relived that happy music there. It was really great.
It's a nice thing about CDs or other physical media. It gives you a connection with a memory.
Yeah, I like that.
I know that I still remember and have the first 3 or 4 CDs I bought back in my teenage years, and those especially bring back vivid memories of the place and time when I bought them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, my first CDs would have been in college, 1985, around that year.
Right.
Yeah, and they were all like rock music then. So I think some of the first ones were like REM's Fables of the Reconstruction and the Smiths' The Queen is Dead, when those albums first came out.
We were talking about CD players this week. I sent you a picture of this one I had, an Onkyo player. It's more than 20 years old now, and I had lent it to someone and I got it back, and the tray wasn't opening, and I took it apart, got it working again, and that still works nicely now. And I have my first CD player from the 1980s as well, and my mother still uses that. Wow. And every 10 years, the lens gets too dirty and the tray freezes up, so I take it apart, clean it, and put some grease on the slide, and it's good to go again.
You used to be able to do that with Apple computers. And in fact, that was the whole selling point. They could open it up and put new cards in and things like that. Now, there's no way to even get inside this thing. Well, they have these tiny screws, but
forget about it.
Yeah.
I had one of the iMacs that you could still take apart.
Yeah.
And I did take it apart to replace the fan and heat sensor, which was a really tricky thing because there was no room to get your finger behind the screen once you got the cover off. But I managed to do it. But the new things are all glued, and I think everything's on one circuit board anyway.
Yeah.
You're going to do more harm than you are good trying to get at anything.
Yeah, that's the problem. So you really have to take it to them. And sometimes they'll even refuse to fix it because it's too old.
Yep.
Like, what are you doing? I got to buy a new one now. This is expensive.
They are expensive.
Yeah. I think my family had our TV for like 20 years. These things only last like 5 or 6 years.
Progress.
The Magnavox, or whatever it was. I don't remember.
Well, Mike, last week we discussed a recording called Light Side by bass clarinetist Matteo Pastorino.
I remember
and that was on Ah-Ma Records. And I wondered, what is Ah-Ma? Well, it turns out that stands for Antonio Martino.
Oh, cool.
The founder and owner of the label. He got in touch with us, thanking us for the album feature, and he's going to let us know about more upcoming releases. So we've got another really cool, small, independent Italian record label on our radar, and looking forward to hearing more releases from Ah-Ma Records.
Yeah, great.
And unfortunately, before we get into the new music for this week, we've got some bad news.
Yeah, some deaths this week.
Deaths
actually,
this
both
week.
In classical and jazz.
Classical and jazz. So let me get over to the piano here for our theme. All right, first in classical.
All right, so we have 2 conductors that passed away this week. The first, Mexican conductor and concert pianist, Enrique Batiz. You may have heard him on some recordings. Conductors tend to appear on a lot of things.
Yeah.
He died on March 30th at age 82. It's a pretty good long life. He co-founded the Orquesta Sinfónica del Estado de Mexico in 1971 and conducted it until 2018 with some hiatuses in between. Mm-hmm. And he recorded the complete orchestral works of Joaquin Rodrigo at a time when the only works that everybody knew by him were the Concierto de Aranjuez and the Fantasia para un Gentilhombre, which he wrote for Andre Segovia. But we got to hear all the other works that he wrote. And that's what I like about modern classical music, that we're hearing a composer's life work, even if they're not like Beethoven or somebody like that, so that's great. He also did record the symphonies of Beethoven and Tchaikovsky. In other obituary news, John Nelson died March 31st, 2025 at age 83, so very close in age to Batiz. He was an American conductor who championed both American music and the works of Hector Berlioz, and especially Berlioz's opera Les Troyens, or The Trojans, which he helped modern listeners to discover because it has since come back into the repertoire due to Colin Davis's famous recording, and a lot of people are recording it now. It's a big, epic opera. He was interested in choral music, which is no surprise if you think about the large choruses in Le Troyen. And he's recorded often with Michael Spires, whose album Baritanor we featured on Adult Music. So he was in a lot of American recordings. So rest in peace, John Nelson and Enrique Batiz.
Over on the jazz side, guitarist George Freeman passed away on April 1st, just a week or so before his 98th birthday, and a gig that he was supposed to play on his birthday to celebrate at the Green Mill. That's according to the Chicago Sun-Times. George Freeman was brother of Von Freeman and uncle of Chico Freeman. He was born on April 10th, 1927 in Chicago. He made his first recordings with the Joe Morris Orchestra in 1947, and he collaborated with Charlie Parker twice in Chicago and once in Detroit between 1950 and 1951. And he played with organist Groove Holmes and saxophonists Gene Ammons and Johnny Griffin over the course of his career. We featured his recording The Good Life on High Note Records. That was back in June of 2023, and that was in our episode Guitarasaurus, episode 122. That came out in July of 2023. And by the way, that was also one of the last recordings that Joey DeFrancesco appeared on before he passed away much too young.
And it's the last released by George Freeman. We don't know if he made another one after that. That's in the can, but we'll find out.
Anyway, a good long life. Too bad he didn't get to play on his birthday just for one more final celebration.
Yeah, it's a little sad.
But rest in peace, George Freeman.
Yeah, we liked that record. It's very blues-oriented. It's I just heard it today, in fact, because I was thinking about him.
Right.
Because of that, the news that came in that he had passed away.
Yeah. Well, speaking of blues, we're going to have a bluesy theme running through, even starting in the classical portion of the program this week.
Right, fittingly so. Well, so let's dedicate this episode to George Freeman. That'd be cool.
Yeah. And then it's going to be all bones. But before we get into that, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the recordings we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. If you can't see the full description or the recording list and links are hard to access, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything's easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you like listening to us, and tell a music-loving friend. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations. Also, come follow us on our Facebook page to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. I usually put up a few choice picks every Friday there. You can leave a message or comment on Facebook as well. Check us out on X. Our ID there is Adult Music Pod. I'll post links to the new episodes when they're published. And if you want to get in touch with us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We play music samples as part of our discussion, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. We also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists and make good memories like Mike and I do.
Yeah, especially with my rediscovering all those old CDs that I had, putting them back on the shelf. I'm up to the rock music now. Now I got to get into all that.
Get rocking out in between the classical and jazz.
Right. Well, that's important too. You still got to rock out.
All right, we're going to start out with some flute, among other things, and go back in time in the classical section this week.
Yeah, this is a bit of an unusual flute recording. It's music by Marais. Now, we generally think of Marais as a composer for the viola da gamba, which was his instrument.
Right.
And these flute works are new for him, for us anyway, as far as his compositions go. I'll talk more about that in a moment. The name of the album is Voix, humaines, Pièces, inédites pour flûte. So unknown pieces or undiscovered pieces for flute. And Voix humaines is the title of one of his works. This is by Les Musiciens de Saint-Julien with François Lazarevitch on flute and the musette. Yeah. We'll talk about that later. And Lucille Boulanger, podcast favorite on viola da gamba, and Eric Belloc on archlute and guitar. This was released on the Alpha label on March 21st. So when we think of Marais, we also think of his operas. I don't think of his operas much. I don't really know much about them. And we also think of Alain Corneau's film Tous les matins du monde, which is how I discovered the name Marais back in the 1980s. With Gerard Depardieu was in that film. We don't connect Marais with the flute, though flautists play his celebrated trios of 1692 for two upper melody instruments and bass, and his variations on the La Folia theme, Folie d'Espagne, get played on the flute as well. With the recent discovery of unpublished repertoire specifically for the flute, the composer now reveals a quite different aspect, and I have to say, yeah, this is different than the mood that I associate with Marais. I think of him more as like a French composer with the sad kind of John Dowland type of sound. Not that they're the same. They're in different styles, but they are tend to be downcast. And this is kind of what excites me about the contemporary performance of classical music. New discoveries are being made all the time. And that was really what got me into classical music in the 80s, when the period instruments revival really started moving and all this research was being done and new discoveries were being made. And that's been happening my entire life. So it's been sort of a through line as I get older. And it's kept me going, I have to say. The manuscripts in question were acquired in 2023 by the American flautist Michael Lynn. The two manuscripts are from the first half of the 18th century. The first one is 350 pages long, and it groups together original engraved editions printed between 1707 and 1711 of flute pieces by Jacques Hauteterre, Michel de la Barre, and Pierre Galtier de Marseille, together with 58 manuscript pieces for flute and bass continuo, and 12 duos for tube flutes by Marais. Up to now, we knew of no such work for flute and bass part by Marais. The second manuscript, acquired only a few months after the first, is called Pièces de Monsieur Couperin pour la flûte traversière, which together with works by Couperin contains some unsigned pieces, around a dozen of which are the same as pieces by Marais in the first newly discovered volume. So is it possible that more of these pieces in the second volume are also by Marais? Despite the uncertainty, it seemed to flautist François Lazarevitch worth including two of these unattributed pieces on this album, the Musette in G minor and the Gigue in E minor, despite its Italianate style. So you got to wonder if that particular one is by Marais. What's fascinating is that these pieces by Marais are not like anything already known in the flute repertoire. The flute around 1700 was still a very recent instrument without a dedicated repertoire, unlike the viola da gamba. There are many phrases that are often too long and difficult to take in a single breath. The composer is writing for the bow, not the breath, and I guess once the flute came in as a solo instrument, they started writing thinking about the breathing that the flautist was going to require. All right, track one. Let's get into the music. La Polonoise, Livre 2. Right away, I'm struck by the softness of the attack and texture. The timbre, very French. The lines are elegant, as we would expect of a French court of the time. And I like Lazarevich's bulb-like tone, like he's blowing glass when he plays. It sounds like precise and delicate work. I really liked this entire track. Let's just hear it. Now, I don't recall hearing any viola da gamba work by Marais that sounded quite like that, with that sort of energy. The work, as you can hear, has a light dance quality well marked by the ensemble. All right, suites 2 through 8. Suite en mi mineur, that's E minor. And this suite isn't in the book as a suite. This was assembled from different pieces in the book into a suite by the performers here. The second track, or track 1 of the suite, is the Symphony. It starts with solo flute with the guitar and gamba coming in gently afterwards. Let's hear the beginning of this work. Yeah, very pretty.
Really great earthy wooden tone there.
Yeah. The whole tone of the performance is very different than the Italian-style works, which are far brighter and more athletic. I'm really enjoying this laid-back tone and this kind of mellow feel that these works have. The third track is a courante, a courtly dance one can hear from the gentle rhythm. It's got a pleasant feel to it and comes across as the music accompanying a dance you might see in a movie dealing with the Renaissance. So you can just imagine one of those movies, or just sample the track yourself. Track 4, Passe-Pied. A quick rhythm moves this very brief piece along quickly, and Lazarevitch keeps the flute lines well shaped and on the move. Track 5, La Gracieuse Sarabande. The ensemble gets a yearning sound out of this work, and I especially like the gentle plucking of Eric Belloc's guitar playing. It's very sensitive. Let's hear it. To come out of these tracks when the listeners are really getting into it, and then my grating voice comes back and they're just jolted out of that pleasurable feeling. Track 6, Menuet. The menuet is also rather quick, like the Passe-Pied, but the flute sound always keeps its cushiony, bulb-like tone. They keep saying like the flute or an instrument like this would have a rounded tone, but I'm hearing it as something more three-dimensional in Lazarevitch's hands. Anyway, let's hear a sample of the opening of this movement. That's almost the whole piece, so I'm going to get out there. Track 7, Rondeau. This movement mirrors the courante in that it has a courtly dance feel to it, though a quicker one than the courante. This suite is being put together by the artist. It's not published like this, and one should keep that in mind. Track 8, Gigue. A very quick, light, cheerful gigue, which is a jig in English. It sounds more elegant in French, doesn't it? Gigue. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a jig. Some sailors doing it on a boat. They did jigues that way too, but even so, it just kind of... I think of Popeye when I hear the word jig somehow, and I just don't think of that when I hear the word gigue. Anyway, let's hear a sample of this. So this is more active than we would expect from Marais. Is it by him? No matter. It falls on the ear well, and I like the performance's liveliness, not least for Eric Belloc's spirited strumming on the guitar. Track 9, Plainte, en ré mineur, from the manuscript Panmure. Guitar sets a somber tone with a deeply felt opening that the flute comes in over.
That upward resolving tone happens a few times in that piece, and it got my attention right away.
Yeah,
really
me
stands
too.
Out. Yeah.
It's a real surprise. And it's also Lazarevitch landing so hard on it, too. And I loved his like sensitive and even vulnerable tone in this, and how he keeps that sensitivity throughout, despite the long sustained notes that he had. So the vocal quality of this plaint is clear in this performance, the flute sighing out its lines, and the tone is maintained throughout this gorgeous work. All right, we get another suite next in tracks 10 through 17 in G major. Track 10, Prelude. The prelude brings a bit of the morning sunrise in its tone, especially after hearing that plaint in the previous track. The cadence was coming right up there. Just had to get out, though. Anyway, that gives me this kind of like sunshine coming through the window, stretching my arms, getting ready for the new day kind of feeling. It's beautifully realized here. Track 11, another sunny work, but with a livelier rhythm. There's some appealing turns of phrase to the melody as well. Let's join this one about 30 seconds in when it gets going. Track 12, Gavotte en Rondeau. This suite was clearly put together to invoke high spirits. This particular movement is livelier still. It has a squarish, courtly feel to its melody and rhythm. Track 13, Voix, humaines. This is the title track of the album. Here it's for the entire ensemble, and we're going to hear a viola da gamba version later. Let's hear just a sample of this version of it. The flute plays the melody sensitively over the gently plucked guitar without viola da gamba. Track 14, Musette de Monsieur Marais. Played with the flute on the melody, accenting the droning quality of the chords, though there's no actual drone here. By falling heavily on the downbeat, viola da gamba comes in for some accents during the second part of the melody, what we think of as the middle eight in popular music. Let's hear a bit of this too. Track 15, Sarabande, starts with the guitar playing arpeggiated chords in a rhythm. The flute comes in with a theme. This moves a bit more quickly than the previous suite's Sarabande. The somber, dark tinge we expect from a Sarabande is there, but all in all, it comes across as light, in keeping with the quality of the suite. Track 16, Rondeau. A cheerful, upbeat quarter note opening is heard in the flute. It feels carefree and rather confident in itself. This is a really great suite to listen to the first thing in the morning. Let's hear a bit of this one too. That four-note hook at the beginning of the melody is really catchy. Track 17, Gigue. This bouncing gigue is also highly appealing. It's got a dotted rhythm and ends the suite with the same sunny disposition it opened with and that we've heard all the way through. Again, Marais did not organize these works to this particular suite, so kudos to the ensemble for coming up with this organization of movements into a suite. This is a perfect set of works to start the day with, as I said. Okay, now remember I told you about Les Voix humaines, track 13. Well, on track 18 we hear the piece again, and this is Lucille Richardot playing the very famous Marais work as viola da gamba soloist, and this is as the work was written. So this is very generous of François Lazarevitch to give Lucille Richardot the spotlight on this track all to herself. She gives the work the weight it generally has, and once she finishes the solo opening line, the arch lute, I believe, I don't think that's a guitar, comes in to provide continuo. Let's hear one of the theme's variations. I'll start this from the minute and 10-second mark. Tracks 19 through 22, Suite en Do, or C major. Track 19, Prelude 81 from Livre 2, or the second book. This suite uses the musette, and we hear it right away. I had mentioned that it's sort of a lighter, more pastoral type of bagpipe instrument, and yeah, it's lighter, but it's not light. And it comes in rather strongly after all the refined gentleness we've heard up to now. Let's hear this. Oh my goodness, what's happening? That's François Lazarevitch playing the musette, by the way, and Éric Belloc is playing with quite a bit more emphasis on the guitar here to be heard over it. I rather enjoyed his playing on this track a lot. Track 20, Gavotte. This gavotte really moves, with the musette moving quickly through its sprightly lines. Belloc sounds like he's got to keep on his toes in this piece in order to keep up. I guess it's pretty easy to get around on the musette. Richardot features with Gambo Continuo as well on this track. Okay, here's my problem with this. Now, The playing is fine. Lazarevitch sounds great on the musette, but after all this sensitive flute playing, we're getting the musette tone, which really doesn't vary very much. It's sort of the same, so it gives the recording a bit of a jolt, like we're taken out of that sort of atmosphere that we were in with this instrument. So no problem with the performances, but I don't know, I just thought this was an odd place to put this piece. Anyway, it goes on. Track 21, Sarabande. Here, the lamenting tone of the musette really does resemble the Scottish bagpipe in tone, if not in power. The constant droning bass of the musette kind of takes away from the feeling of the sarabande. In track 22, La Sautillante, which I guess is sort of like a saltarello in Italian. This is from Livre 4, or 4. This is a brief, jumpy piece. It's hard for me to believe this is by Marais. The mood is far too jumpy, as the title would suggest. Sauter, I guess, would be the jump. It comes across with energy, with the guitar sounding like he's working hard to keep up with the effortless speed of the musette. This suite was interesting to hear in this mode, but it broke up the mood of the album for me. Anyway, we get back to that original mood in tracks 23 to 24, Suite en La, or A major. Track 23 is called La Guitare, from Livre 3, or 3. This track features the solo guitar playing a combination of plucked melody and hard-strummed chords, so Eric Belloc gets a solo track here. Let's hear a little bit of him. This rather interesting juxtaposition of two styles of playing continues throughout the 4-minute work. The rhythm of the piece becomes hypnotic as it goes on. There's a nice variation on the theme with double-stopped patterns in the 3rd minute, followed by a rippling section of chords. We hear one more statement of the opening style to end the piece. Track 24, Caprice ou Sonate from Livre 4. Very different in sound and rhythm than the previous work. Here we have a mellower guitar with viola da gamba, with the flute taking the lead melody. Whenever the flute is in the piece, it softens the mood, and this is mainly due to Lazarevitch's diffuse tone, which invites you to relax into it. The opening ends and we get a more lively section, which really sounds like a completely separate movement, but it's together with the opening in this almost 5-minute track. Let's hear that. I'm going to skip ahead to 2 minutes and 30 seconds here. Chromaticism thrown in there in the middle. So the section is lively, but doesn't match the speed of the fast movement suites with musette. This is a more comfortable fast speed. Tracks 25 through 29, we get the final suite on the album in G minor. Track 25 is a sarabande, and the sarabande starts gently in the flute, with steady participation from Lucille Richardot on viola da gamba, and some gently plucked arch flute chords. It's highly melodic and very attractive. Track 26, Gavotte. The gavotte has a vigorous Baroque ballroom feel to it. It's well characterized here. The flute sounding like it's shaking the melody loose, along with the guitar. This rhythm kind of makes me imagine these women in these puffy dresses just getting down as best they can, given their accoutrement. Track 27, Menuets. The Menuet begins without a pause from the gavotte and is different in rhythm, but pretty much the same tempo. It's got an especially attractive B section. Track 28, Musette. Now, we don't actually hear the musette instrument in this movement, Richardon and viola da gamba providing the bagpipe-like drones that nevertheless don't sound as grating as the actual instrument can. I like the gentle feel of this movement. Let's hear a bit of it. And track 29, Gigue. The Gigue has an appealing bounce to it, and it's rather brief. At just over a minute, it's pretty repetitive, but very appealing. And that's the album. Well, I guess I'm going to have to rethink what Marais' music sounds like. I've associated his music so fully with the lugubrious pace and sound that the viola da gamba invites that these smoother tempoed, more sensual works make me think I'm listening to a different composer. In some movements, that may be the case, but Marais' work at court probably required him to provide more danceable material, of which there's an ample amount here. François Lazarevitch adds to the appeal with his diffuse, rounded tone, and I called it bulb-like earlier. He's a pleasure to listen to throughout, and my ear was also frequently drawn to Éric Belloc's continuo stylings on guitar. Lucille Richardot delivers a beautiful performance of Les Voix humaines on viola da gamba on track 18, but for the rest, she's an accompaniment and mostly reinforces what the flute is doing. I really do wish the entire recording would have stuck to the flute as the lead instrument, with interludes for the viola da gamba as on Les Voix humaines and the guitar as on the work La Guitare on track 23. I was interested to hear the instrument in the context of a Baroque suite, but the suite featuring the musette broke up the mood of the album dramatically. If you're listening to this playing in the background, the suite in C major in tracks 19 to 22 quickly brings it to the front of your mind due to the musette's attention-grabbing sound. I imagine the musette will appeal to some, but if it doesn't appeal to you, it shouldn't be enough to keep you away from the sensual sounds of this album. It really is different than most Baroque albums, and it's worthy of hearing.
The unique earthy tone of the wooden flute got my attention right away. It's so nuanced and has a lot of different aspects to the way that he inflects it and uses the breath, that you'll constantly find new interesting characteristics of it throughout the recording. This period music has a lot of dance pieces by nature here, but the tempos are selected for musicality and they don't feel hurried. They're just kind of snap to the rhythms and allow for a lot of musicality. I especially like that one I pointed out in track 9 for that upward moving resolution that's kind of unique in the flute lines there. And I'll fall into the happy to hear the musette tone camp. I kind of thought it was charming in its own unique way. And, maybe it's a little bit out of character with the rest of the material. I don't know if I'd want to hear a whole album of just the musette, though. That might be a bit
maybe
much.
It's a better thing that's just got one suite here.
And the album is beautifully recorded up close with lots of detail. The balance is really good, though, but you feel like you hear everything that's coming out of these instruments. It's super clear. Yeah, very nice Baroque music and quite unique, as you say, especially considering what we know about the composer.
I've got to say, though, I've read that composers from Marais all the way up to Ravel and probably beyond really loved the musette and I guess what it represented, the French countryside and things like that.
Right.
It inspired a lot of their music. So there you go.
To us, it just sounds strange, but, that's modern ears. Yeah.
Well, that's because we haven't been hearing it, I guess. All right. Our next album is absolutely spectacular. You should just go out and hear this right away, and then you can come back and hear what I have to say about it later. But this is Dvořák and Florence Price, piano quintets by the Takacs Quartet and Marc-Andre Hamelin on the piano. This is on the Hyperion label, released March 28th, and it starts with Florence Price's four-movement piano quintet in A minor, written in around 1936. Now, when Dvořák went to America, he encouraged Americans to look to Black and Native American melodies as the foundation of American music. And Florence Price heeded this advice. Dvořák's influence can be heard in this work. The piano quintet was one of a large cache of Price's unpublished manuscripts that was discovered in the attic of an abandoned house in Illinois, which Price had used as a summer home. Now, a lot of these themes are probably very close to Price's heart, as she herself was a Black composer and probably heard people singing a lot of these types of melodies. Track 1, the first movement, Allegro non troppo. This has pentatonic melodies, and the piece itself is pretty serious with the straight rhythm. You can hear the pentatonic lilt reminiscent of Dvořák's American works. All right, drama's building up, and we get out of there. Now, the piano rather surprised me, as to my ear, this had the character of a string quartet. Hamelin's sound matches the quartet's well here. He's got a classy tone, and the second theme at 1 minute and 45 seconds is also pentatonic, but sounds romantic, as does the very romantic solo piano at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. But then the strings come in with the pentatonic feel. The whole pentatonic feel is heard most directly in the string quartet's part, though it's present in the piano too. I guess it's the inflection in the strings that makes it stand out. We hear a repeat of the opening at 4 minutes and 15 seconds. I have to say, the balance and ensemble of the Takacs on this recording is exquisite. They sound like a single body playing and inflect the American sound well. Hamelin brings smooth virtuosity to his often romantic-sounding part. The development section is entered into via a harsh chord, which we also heard earlier when it led to the repeat of the opening material. This development has a rising quality to it, trying to find higher harmonic ground. By the 9th minute, we've arrived back at the theme, but here it's played dramatically with strong accents by the Takacs. This doesn't work like a strict recapitulation, but seems to go off in new developmental directions. There's some pretty ornamentation by Hamelin in this section. The second theme from the opening does come back reorchestrated, as is Price's way. We know this from her symphonies, which we talked about earlier. And it comes back with a different feel to it. The ending leading up to the final cadence is nicely orchestrated and well judged by the ensemble, who hold the sonata form together exceptionally well, making sure the climaxes and other emotional points register fully. Track 2, the second movement, Andante con moto. A touching unison pentatonic opening is heard in the strings. At 20 seconds, the main theme starts, sounding like a Black folk song of the era. Let's hear a bit of this. All right, now I need to say, when you hear that sort of a theme, we immediately think of Dvořák. But the style really isn't Dvořák's style. Dvořák gets credit for it because he brought it into classical music, but he heard it around him when he was in America. So this really more directly belongs to Florence Price and to the people who made this music in the 19th century. The theme, as you heard, is immediately catchy. This gentle movement keeps its black folk song quality and is beautifully judged by the ensemble. They communicate a sense of the shape of the movement and keep all of the appealing melodies flowing. More importantly, they hold everything together, and this wasn't the case in some of the symphony recordings that we heard, which kind of came across as more diffuse to me. This really feels of a piece. All of the themes are given a dusky harmonization, and the ensemble choose an appropriate tempo and dynamic to put that quality across. Track 3, Juba, Allegro. The juba was a dance whose syncopated rhythms were accompanied by stomping and slapping, absent any percussion instruments. The juba is associated with enslaved plantation workers. It sounds close to a cakewalk. The ebullient rhythm is well captured here, and the Takacs have a surprising sense of how it should sound, as does Hamelin, but we've heard him in music like this before. Let's hear it. The ensemble really brings a sense of fun to this piece, particularly Hamelin, who really kind of brightens the sound a lot with his piano playing. They don't make the music too jumpy, going for a more relaxed flow, but with a sharply edged rhythm. The approach works exceptionally well. The middle section is less jumpy and smoother sounding. This is in the usual ABA form, and the opening juba dance comes back at the end. Track 4, Scherzo, marked Allegro, and then there's a coda that follows. This is the briefest movement of the work. The notes describe it as a mere conclusion. It features a dance-like theme. The notes call it a tarantella, and it does have a flow in common with that, especially at the minute and 32-second mark, but I'm going to sample this from the beginning. Hamelin excels with his smooth scale figures in this movement, while the Takacs bring out the American spice in the string writing. The piece has an exciting ending that's not overdone. To my ear, this is an ideal performance of this work. It brings a subtlety via its spacious approach that I feel is in the score and that isn't brought out in many recordings of Price's works. Tracks 5 through 8, Antonín Dvořák, Piano Quintet No. 2 in A major, Opus 81, from 1887. Okay, that means this was composed before Dvořák went to America, so we're not going to hear those American-inflected pentatonic melodies like we heard in the Florence Price piece. Track 5, the first movement, Allegro ma non tanto. The cello plays a gorgeous melody over an ostinato piano. This is suddenly interrupted by a more urgent rhythm and the violin playing a new theme over the piano's rhythmic line. Dvořák's second theme comes in at about the 1-minute mark and is more flowing and romantic, particularly in the piano part, which leads the way. Hamelin has a deeply felt sense of the romantic piano and puts this across beautifully, along with Edwin Duesenberg's violin lead. The urgent rhythm again interrupts, then a new, quicker theme comes in. I liked the haunting, more urgent version of the opening melody that we hear at 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and I'm going to sample that. Wow, that's really great playing.
Yeah.
This sample will also give you a sense of the energy of the ensemble and the perfect balance achieved by the recording. I like the heavy rhythmic figure that ends the exposition, and then we hear the exposition repeated. We get to the development section at around the 7-minute and 40-second mark. It's gently slipped into. The piano and violin slow the tempo and play a romantic, stretched-out theme. It's a nice touch in the composition. After that, the tempo gets urgent again, and we have quick changes between sections and keys. The return to the recapitulation occurs after a quiet section crescendos into a more urgent section that leads into it at 10 minutes and 53 seconds. I'm enjoying the clarity of line and individual elements in the more urgent sections. This is a top-class performance with a lot of expression as well. There's a brief coda at the end, elevating the energy and leading to an exciting yet smoothly taken ending. Track 6, Dumka, Andante con moto. A dumka is a form of folk music, both song and dance, originating in Ukraine. Now, Russ noticed right away that this melody was lifted by Edin Abez for his song Nature Boy, which Nat King Cole sang, really a jazz standard.
Yeah, anyone who knows that melody will hear it right away.
Yeah, it made me jump too. I was kind of like, wow, yeah. I didn't realize where that came from. It sounds great here in its original context. Yeah, this came as a surprise to me too, because I'm unfamiliar with this particular piano quintet. Hamelin gives this line a stark kind of stillness. His playing on this album is exemplary, as is everyone's. Let's hear the famous theme. Okay, now if you're one of these people who's saying that Dvořák lifted all of his melodies from popular Black American songs for his New World Symphony and everything else, well, he had some of his immortal melodies lifted too. So it just went along on a lot. You would be surprised at how many popular songs have come from original classical music melodies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Barry Manilow.
Oh boy, don't even get me started. At 2 minutes and 37 seconds, we get to a new, more flowing theme. There's an inventive variation on the theme at 3 minutes and 30 seconds, with the piano playing the theme and the quartet engaging in some timbrally interesting accompaniment with their soft, lightly scraping lines. The opening Nature Boy theme returns in the 5th minute. See, now I'm calling it the Nature Boy theme because we just know it better that way. But it needs a label, so that's what I'm going to call it, even though that came later. At 6 minutes and 54 seconds, we hear the opening 3 notes of that theme repurposed for a faster, more rhythmic section, completely transforming it. It's back in more romantic flowing guise in the 8th and 9th minutes. A more dancing section begins in the 9th minute, and at 11 minutes we hear the opening theme played straight in the piano, and some opening gestures repeated. I love the downward movement in the bass for the end of the movement, which is full of character. Track 7, Scherzo, Furiant, marked molto vivace and tempo. This is a dancing contrast to the previous movement. Let's hear a bit of this. Yeah, really gorgeous. The cello gets the theme, which the piano takes over for the next phrase, then the entire quartet joins in. The quick changes of rhythm, timbre, and dynamic are expertly achieved here. There are gorgeous moments toward the entry into the first minute. At 1 minute and 32 seconds, there's a cadence, and then the softer middle section begins. The Takacs bringing exquisite light tone to their harmonized theme. The A section returns at around the 3 minute and 40 second mark to end the movement on an upbeat note. Track 8, the fourth movement, Allegro. This starts almost with a strumming figure in the piano and quartet, and then a rascally theme comes in. Notice the sudden quieting and the fantastic control Hamelin exerts over the dynamic after we hear the theme in this sample. The theme, as heard in the violin at 1 minute and 20 seconds, takes on a more folk-like quality in the way it's set. We hear another great example of the Takacs and Hamelin's sense of gradation of dynamic in the third minute. The fourth minute gets more excitable with its speed, changes of harmony, and dynamic. There's a slow, beautifully judged decrescendo and decelerando into the theme at 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Wow, this is great music making. After a section that seems like it might be leading to the end, there's a sudden decrescendo to a weary-sounding, gentle, spacious theme in the 6th and 7th minutes. The vibrato-less strings give the chords a holy quality. The piano then starts repeating a figure, the quartet coming in and speeding it up with a crescendo added, leading to the end. And that's the album. The performances here, particularly of the Price Quintet, get everything right. The Price Quintet comes across with its form well articulated and gorgeous folksy melodies registering fully. It's a great performance and an excellent example of how Price's music should be played. If you're new to Price's music, this performance is where to start. The Dvořák work comes across pristinely in sound and performance as well. Hamelin bringing a deep feeling of the Romantic era to his playing with a lot of space around and in between his lines, and the Takacs perfectly balanced and dynamic throughout, also pacing exceptionally well. This is the best way to get to know these two works. The playing is exemplary, and the sense of having the music put directly and memorably into your body and brain is palpable. If you love great playing and great interpreting, this album is a must-hear. It's an A-list recording and performance if there ever was one. This is an album to play again and again, and I'm sure I'll be doing that all year long.
The Price work is filled with American musical references, pentatonic spiritual melodies, a bit of ragtime too, and the quartet plays the melodies passionately and has some fanciful playing right from the first movement. And the Dvořák has constant changes of tempo and mood, but there's always a great new melodic idea around each corner. I've always liked the edgy tone the Takacs quartet can get on intense passages, and they use that to a lot of effect on the dynamic spots in the music. Hamelin's playing's integrated seamlessly in phrasing and dynamics with the ensemble here. Really passionate and enjoyable playing through both of the works.
Okay, now last week we talked about Pierre Boulez's string quartet, or Livre de 14 for all the eggheads out there. So this week I thought we'd go the other way and get something a little more popular sounding, and we've got that in Wynton Marsalis's Blues Symphony, composed in 2009. This 7-movement work is the full album, and this is by the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Jader Bignamini, who is Italian, from Italy. This is on the Pentatone label, released on March 14th. First of all, I want to say I like the cover art, which features a pretty girl putting up the title of an old-style movie theater marquee, like the ones we saw when we were younger. And it turns out this particular theater is significant. It was located in Paradise Valley, the business district and entertainment center of a densely populated African-American residential area in Detroit known as Black Bottom from the 1920s through the 1950s. The Paradise Theater, now don't get this confused with the Paradise Theater that Styx sing about on their album called Paradise Theater. That one was in Chicago, which is where Styx were from. It experiences a similar trajectory to this theater, though. So the Paradise Theater in Detroit opened in 1941 in the former Orchestra Hall, built for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra in 1919, and was the place to hear jazz greats such as Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, and Dizzy Gillespie. Urban renewal programs and the construction of freeways in the 1960s abruptly halted life in Paradise Valley and the Black Bottom neighborhood, pushing residents out of their homes and businesses, and really ruining everybody's fun also. By using an image of the Paradise Theater as source for the cover design, the album commemorates the tragic disappearance of a neighborhood that once was among the biggest hubs of Black American music. The DSO returned to its historic home in 1989, and each season pays tribute to Orchestra Hall's legacy as a jazz destination through its Paradise Jazz series. Now, the Blues Symphony by Wynton Marsalis is a 7-movement work that gives a symphonic identity to the form and feeling of the blues. It utilizes regional and stylistic particulars of the idiom's language and form to convey the basic point of view of the blues as music, which is, life hands you hard times. That's what the blues wants to tell us. The piece is intended to further the legacy of Scott Joplin, George Gershwin, James P. Johnson, Leonard Bernstein, John Lewis, Gunther Schuller, and others who were determined to add the innovations of jazz to the vocabulary of the symphonic orchestra. Marsalis believes there's an organic and real connection between all Western traditions regardless of instrumentation, and that the symphonic orchestra can and will swing, play the blues, feature melodic improvisation, and execute the more virtuosic aspects of jazz and American vernacular music with absolute authenticity. The Blues Symphony is Wynton Marsalis' second symphonic work. It was first conceptualized in 2008, and Marsalis worked with music supervisor Jonathan Kelly for more than a decade on its development. And there's a lot packed into this work. The notes don't go through the exact movement-by-movement inspirations, so we'll have to use our musical experience and vocabulary to work it all out. So track 1, movement 1, Born in Hope. The movement starts with a march rhythm on a snare drum, followed by a flute playing a fife melody. And really, this is the origins of ragtime, was really marching band music. It has a military feel to it. The opening texture, with the winds playing various melodies and the strings playing a droning theme, is nice. We then get to the string theme up close. The pace is on the slow, careful side. There's a 12-bar blues chord progression highlighted by the bass. Let's hear a little bit of this. Pretty sure our ears were drawn to that blues sort of progression.
Yep.
Great clarity of detail in this recording, but I have to say, I feel like that rhythm could be more strongly marked and could kind of swing a little harder. It's coming across too much on the square, counted side. Mm-hmm. You can hear the jazz lilt in the writing, though. The recording is rich and full, particularly in fortes, with the snare drum registering crisply. Marsalis relies heavily on the winds for continuity in this movement. You'll hear them playing their themes often as a sort of returning texture. The low brass at 5 minutes and 40 seconds are a pretty cool timbre in this work. By the 6-minute mark, we're at the loudest dynamic yet, and the rhythm is now more of a dance. The movement has built from a pianissimo to a fortissimo, like it's a marching band coming up on us and now walking by. So maybe there's a little bit of a Charles Ives influence in there too. The rhythm straightens out into bold statements punctuated by cymbal crashes at the end. We hear a return to the fife or the flute and drum at the very end. I said the fife because I was thinking of fife and drum sort of marching music there. I think that's what he's evoking. Track 2, Swimming in Sorrow, the second movement, and the first one to use alliteration. More of them will. This starts with atmospheric bass and light cymbal rolls. The strings play a theme, particularly in the cellos. The entire opening is in the low end of the orchestra. There's a build-up, then a decrescendo that eventually leads to a warm folk song theme of the kind Dvořák used in his America-inspired works. So it's drawn from what Marsalis called vernacular music, or black vernacular music, what I called black folk song themes. There are also some teasing brass harmonies evoking the 1920s for me. Gershwinesque brass are heard at 3 minutes, as well as a clarinet slide at 4 minutes evoking Rhapsody in Blue. Then brass and clarinet evoking melodies from Porgy and Bess come up in the 5th minute. The movement has a floating sideshow quality to it. There's no overall rhythm driving the material. It's sort of amorphous, but with appealing shreds of Gershwin-type themes. At the 6 minute and 35 second mark, a solid rhythm develops, and we have a bluesy folk song-like melody. I do like those light, brief glissandos in the melody to make it really sound more American. At the 8 minute mark, a Hollywood-like build-up breaks this theme up. Trombone has a lot of material in this movement and makes sure we hear a lot of glissandos for bluesy effect. At the 10 minute mark, a new rhythmic section threatens to start up, but stops for solo instruments to soliloquize briefly. There are some great details in the movement, with a tuba blat at about the 11 minute mark, and a smoky trumpet solo, full of light glissandos and blue notes in the 11th minute. The trumpet ends the movement, and I found this rather odd structurally. It never really gets going, just moving from thematic texture to thematic texture. I suspect he's kind of following Gershwin's lead in Rhapsody in Blue here, because Gershwin did something similar, but all of his sections were highly rhythmic, and we really enjoyed them. Track 3, Reconstruction Rag. Notice another alliteration. Starts with some colorful harmony and an amorphous rhythm. A slow, ungainly waltz breaks out at about the 45 second mark, with strings playing the theme. Trumpet takes over the next phrase in the first minute. This evaporates, then we get something like an early 1900s cakewalk rhythm. Marsalis injects sudden rhythmic variations in the overall line, but the dance we're hearing as the main theme and rhythm has a lot of fantastic brassy details, not least from the tuba. Let's hear a little bit of this. Again, with such sassy playing and that rhythm, I really want to hear the orchestra throw caution to the wind a little bit more so that they can really throw themselves into that and really make the rhythm more lively. It's very appealing the way it is, though, I have to say. Winds break up the dance at around the 4 minute mark, playing in a polyphonic but not rhythmically defined mass. The rhythm here sounds pretty complicated, which may be why we're getting such careful tempos from the orchestra. Everything is neatly in place, and the orchestra is happy to make some ugly sounds, especially in the lower end. Listen to the 5th minute for that. The dance rhythm starts up again at just before the 6-minute mark. Trumpet gets a bluesy solo at 6 minutes and 25 seconds. We're now hearing a New Orleans-style brassy polyphony, followed at 7 minutes by a railroad constructing type of rhythm, with metallic clanks, and I can even hear a steam engine's woo-woo in the brass. The cakewalk rhythm is back at the end. The ending of the movement has a build-up and ends with a combination of the cakewalk rhythm and locomotive wails. Yeah, where would America be without the
train references?
The railroad, yeah. Where would American music be without the railroad? Track 4, Southwestern Shakedown. Yeah, Marsalis is having a really fun time with these titles. It's nice in a way. He's enjoying himself. This starts out with some bluesy chords, gorgeously played by brass. Marsalis has a really good ear for orchestration. This section also comes across as Gershwin-esque. I think it's the harmony orchestrated this way and the use of blue notes that make me think of Gershwin. The harmony evokes the blues well in the orchestral format. A rhythm comes in at about the 2 minute and 20 second mark along with a new theme, and I'm going to sample that part. Now, when you hear rhythms like that, I think of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra and how expertly they put this across. This is, again, a little cautious. I'd really like to hear the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra play this with a string section, brought in from an orchestra that plays this kind of music. There's a kind of oozing, striding feeling to the rhythm. It's well caught and well put across by the orchestra on this exceptionally clear recording. We occasionally get a train whistle harmony and some clacking percussive rhythm. In fact, the entire section from 4 minutes to about the 6 minute mark evokes a passing train. At 6 minutes, a delicate string harmony comes in, accompanying a theme played by various winds and brass. The movement ends with the slow but steady and powerful train rhythm doing a natural fade as though passing by. Track 5, Big City Breaks. Fortissimo stabbing chords open the movement with powerful percussion registering strongly on the recording. Even the gently tapped drum cymbals come across with crystalline clarity on the recording. This movement features a drum kit. The next section features fragmentary themes and rhythms, and the next section features some mute effects on trumpets and slapsticks, providing percussion. Let's hear a bit of that. The movement ends with the drums and more string chord stabs. Track 6, we get into a bit of Latin rhythm here. Danzón y mambo, choro y samba. This has a sweet, even saccharine string opening. It's got the feel of a classical string quartet. It comes across as an intro. A solo violin emerges with a theme that brings us to a Latin rhythm at around the 1 minute mark, and I'd like us to hear that. Winds come in at the 2-minute mark with fluttering figuration, and in the low brass we hear another Gershwin-esque theme. Marsalis really has internalized Gershwin's way with big orchestral works. There's a pretty flute melody afterwards over a Latin rhythm in the 3rd minute set to a 12-bar blues chord progression. Hand clapping comes in for the next brassy section. There's more of a song-like Latin feel to the next section at the 6-minute mark. Again, the structure of this movement comes across as a pageant, a set of scenes displaying various styles. Party sections are followed by quieter but still mischievous rhythmic sections. The movement has a big splashy finish with a sudden cut in dynamics to a flute line that winds down without reaching its final note to a tonic chord. And track 7, the last movement, Dialogue in Democracy. This has an exciting opening with muted brass making an interesting sound. The opening is cartoonish in its speed in a Carl W. Stalling Looney Tunes way. I'm sure that's the reference here. It's a pretty loopy movement, rhythmically vivacious and constantly on the move. You know, when you think of the music Carl Stalling wrote for the Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny cartoons, you just think someone who wasn't American couldn't have possibly written or come up with something like that. It really is. Just the energy and the constant changes and the everything in the kitchen sink sort of approach really is something that you really had to grow up in America at that time to be able to do, or to even think of. Marsalis gives the brass some exciting lines, and being that they're so low in the bass, they come across as comical as well. I like the sense of humor in this movement. This particular movement has a rhythmic vivaciousness from the orchestra that I missed in the rest of the piece, though I thought the Latin rhythms in movement 6 came across well. There's a full, splashy cadence at around the 5-minute mark, making you think the work is over, but the rushing music of the opening resumes. Interestingly, the piece ends with a sort of sudden pause and rite of spring-like final percussion hit and brass blast. The work really comes across as a narrative, a history of jazz in sound only, without words. It comes across as varied and messy as the history of jazz music itself, and I mean messy as a compliment so far as this work goes. It gets a lot in, and it doesn't all necessarily fit, just as it's difficult to truly summarize the history of jazz. There's just so much variation, making jazz a rich tradition. Structurally, this work is put together like a Gershwin work, and in fact Marsalis has absorbed a lot of Gershwin's compositional DNA. Gershwin will merely have one section follow another in song-like fashion, maybe with connecting sections, but there's no sense of a smaller section being nested in a larger one, as we get in European classical music. There's no hierarchy. People saw this as a flaw in Gershwin's music, but American critics have called the lack of hierarchy democratic, and I agree with that. It's an American way of composing big works. All sections of this work are equal. The recording of the work is big-boned in sound and exceptionally clear, with the low notes and percussion registering with exceptional clarity. The real pleasure of this work for me was in the brass writing. Marsalis is rather cheeky in some of the effects he puts into the works, from very low tuba blats to high muted trumpet razzes and everything in between. I do wish the performance had leaned into the jazz and blues stylings more. Tempos are approached rather carefully, especially in the opening movements, and as a result we wind up listening more intellectually than emotionally or with our bodies, physically. The slow, careful approach to the opening movements takes some of the rhythmic excitement that's clearly present in the score away. The orchestra seems to loosen up for the final 2 movements. The work has no performing history yet, so as it's performed, the jazz elements will come across more slickly, I hope. And I certainly hope that American orchestras especially will take this work up. Still, this is a good performance, give it an excellent recording, and it's a lot of fun for the most part, and educational too, in the way it incorporates so many styles of early jazz.
There's a lot to enjoy here and a lot of excitement. The blues themes are apparent right away, and you get sort of a American music history lesson, as you say, as it goes along. The brass parts are great and a lot of fun, and the recording, as you say, is big-boned, and a lot of the deep sounds and the percussion, as well as the high-end trumpets, come through. Structurally, it's a little bit odd, I felt, as you were mentioning in hierarchy. The long movements are really long, and sometimes I felt I was awash in an area. I wasn't quite sure where it was going. So right. I don't know that I'm saying they should be tightened up more compositionally, but I just wasn't quite sure where I was transitioning sometimes in those sections that are really long.
It kind of, we live in Japan, and it kind of gave me the feeling of a lot of these like smaller Japanese houses where people have a lot of things, so it's all like piled up on all the walls. I kind of got that, that the space wasn't big enough to contain all of the ideas that are in it.
Yeah, that's the sense I got too. And I was really happy to have all the different blues sort of themes coming through and to hear that in an orchestral setting. So I agree with Marsalis that those are valid themes and an orchestra can do them. I was a little also surprised when it turned to Latin in the sixth movement. It doesn't really fit with the blues ambiance. And I was thinking, this could be like a whole nother work exploring Latin themes in American music, or maybe specifically the ones that came through New Orleans, where Marsalis comes from. So there's a whole lot in here, a lot of movements, and some of the movements are really long. It's a monstrous work. Yeah, it's unique, and I enjoyed listening to it. About the performance, I agree with you. The orchestra could lean in more on the more rhythmic areas of the compositions and maybe not sound so careful. But as you say, it doesn't have a long performance history, so it's probably something that orchestras and conductors are getting used to.
Right. Like with the Florence Price works, too. We finally got a really great performance of one of her works in the piano quintet that we heard today.
Yeah. As we always say, classical music is really European music, but now it belongs to the world, just like jazz music does. And there's no reason why these American themes can't be successfully incorporated into contemporary music. So I'm happy that projects like this are being tackled, and hope more orchestras will perform this piece around the world.
Yeah, you're not going to hear AI come up with anything like this. No way.
Oh, by the way, I met and had a little conversation with Wynton Marsalis back when I was a youngster.
Wow.
I was working on the cornet solo repertoire, the Arbin solos and the Herbert Clark solos. And that was right around the time when he was going around performing those works. And I got to go back after the performance and talk with him about music practice and trumpet playing and girls and all kinds of stuff. We had a little chat.
Girls too, huh?
Well, we were talking about distractions from practice, and he said there are good distractions and bad distractions. So,
were girls a good one or a bad one?
They were a good distraction.
Okay. It's good to know.
I guess I was, 16 or 17 at the time. A long time ago.
Right.
He was a young man at that time, too. All right, speaking of blues and jazz, we're going to move over to the jazz side now. And as I mentioned at the top of the program, it's going to be all bones tonight. Trombones, that is, with trombonists as the leaders and featured instruments on all three recordings, but we've got a lot of other things in the mix as well. And we're going to start out with Robert Cozma's Changes in Life. This is a self-release. It came out March 27th, and Robert Cozma is from Romania. He was born in 1993. He's a composer, arranger, trombonist, and pianist as well. He started his musical life at the Octav Bancila, if I'm saying that right, in Romanian, National College of Art in Iași, Romania. His passion for jazz led him to the George Enescu National University, where he majored in jazz composition. He received an Erasmus scholarship and studied jazz trombone at the Hochschule für Musik in Nuremberg, Germany, under Professor Jürgen Nudert. He graduated in 2019, and he continued studying with German jazz figures, and he had his compositions featured in notable performances, including the NDR Big Band. In 2022, he became a member of the Union of Composers and Musicologists of Romania. He completed his doctorate in music at the George Enescu National University of Arts, his PhD thesis, Jazz Styles and Writing Techniques for Big Band in My Own Works. Interesting. And currently, he's a teaching assistant at the George Enescu National University of Arts. He teaches jazz improvisation and composition. The notes about this recording from his homepage say, quote, "I'm thrilled to announce the release of Changes in Life, a personal project that reflects the experiences and transformations of recent years. These compositions are inspired by moments of change, growth, and rediscovery, influenced by the great jazz pianists and composers Fred Hirsch, Richard Oshanitsky, and Brad Meldau. It has been an incredible journey, and this album would not have been possible without the support of these outstanding musicians." The musicians on this recording: Robert Cozma trombone and all original compositions, Marcus Harm on saxophones, Andreas Faith piano, Andreas Kurz double bass, Dominic Raab on drums, who we've heard a few times back in episode 90, mostly made in Germany, with I Loves You Porgy, a vibraphone ensemble recording on the Jazz label with Matthias Strucken as the leader there. And more recently, in episode 201, War and Apocalypse Music, as a leader with one of our favorite pianists, Billy Test, on Mocambo Affair, also on Jazz. I know Mike likes that recording.
Yeah, I got to pick that up. They only have it through their Bandcamp. I'm going to have to look into that.
That came out on February 7th of this year. We've got Gerard Grell, the sound engineer, and Christoph Stickel on mastering. The recording's going to start out with Song for Dad. This has an airy, flowing feel traced out in delicate cymbals from Rob. It starts with a rhythm section intro. The trombone melody is built around a catchy little repeating phrase that works in more variations on the phrase and then repeats with Harm's sax joining in and the two splitting off in spots. Let's hear this recording get going. And a sax joining in from there, we get the first taste of Cozma's warm and lyrical phrasing style that will continue throughout, a really pleasing sound. Let's hear some of his improvised solo after the melody. Nice phrasing and building up tension with rhythmic ideas. Kurz follows with a bass solo with snappy articulation, and the horns are back with a repeat of the melody section with nice improvisations from Faith's piano below. It has a softer ending section of horn phrases. Track 2 is Thinking of Reggie, and it's also written in Romanian there, which I think is Cu gândul la Reggie. This gets going with bouncy rhythmic piano. Bass joins in on the left-hand line, and Rob has a kind of happy show tune beat to start. The sunny unison horn melody has interesting one-measure breaks and spots and splits into different lines at the end. Let's check it out. Cozma's up first for a solo with a buoyant nature reaching up high, and the beat has morphed into more of a happy samba feel. Let's hear Marcus Harm's alto sax playing on this one. Melodic and happy-sounding lines. The horns are back together there for a final melody section that has extended repeating phrases over the opening bass lines to a slow final line. Track 3, Night Song. This is a really charming tune. There's a 16-measure rhythm section intro with ringing piano chords from Faith. Sax and trombone start out together on the melody over integrated bass lines. The syncopation is slinky with unusual phrasing. Then the sax phrases become independent and bass, trombone, and piano chords sync together. Cozma's solo on this is agile and playful, and Harm is on soprano sax here with a really nice tone. Let's hear a little bit of each of them. Faith has a piano solo, and Curse has a snappy bass solo on this tune too, with a great sense of forward motion. The horn melody returns, and there's a cool ending section of left-hand piano and bass lines with drum build-up from Rob that the horns add to with long phrases to the ending. Track 4, Uncertain Thoughts, a really rhythmic tune with some elements that create the uncertainty. There's an 8-measure intro. The horn melody has a 2-beat measure after the first 8 measures, then a 9-measure section before the first part repeats with a cool new bass line. The following section is different the next time into tricky left-hand piano and bass lines. The horns are back for a final section into a bass solo from Kurz. Let's hear his playing on this tune. Harm follows from there on alto sax, and things get really swinging over walking bass, and Cozma has a solo that floats effortlessly over the chugging rhythm. The horns are back for a final melody section, continuing on over the bass and piano lines we heard earlier to end it. Track 5 is Evening Walk, a gentle even beat and ringing bass under a long lyrical melody with nice intertwining of sax and trombone lines. New developments keep coming along, and Cozma's tone is great with some longing phrases. We'll only be able to hear about half of this in a sample, but let's take a listen. After the melody, Faith has a piano solo first with softly rippling lines, so let's check out his playing on this tune. Cozma has a lyrical solo with a vocal-like quality, but also has some agile slide work included. Harm returns to bring back the final shorter melody section, and there's a pause for some solo trombone before the final phrases. Track 6, Hirschian Waltz. Cozma mentions pianist Fred Hirsch as an influence, so I assume this is a nod to him. It's a fast waltz that will take on a more subdivided feel from Rob's drums later on in the tune. The melody phrases remind me a bit of Speak Low. After a rhythm section intro, Cozma is in with a melody that gets him soaring higher and higher with a great tone. Harm will join in for a harmonized round from there on soprano sax again. Let's come back to hear some of Cozma's solo on this tune. Piano ripples starting there from Faith, who has an animated piano solo, and he works that into the high register and then brings it down softly for a final horn melody section. The ending has soft horn lines over ringing repeated high bass notes. Track 7, Stella on Strange Times. How strange is Stella? Well, not as strange as her cousin Bella. Bella by Barlight, if you remember the old John Lurie tune.
Yeah, those are the lounge lizards, right?
Yeah. Anyway, there's an 8-measure rhythm section intro, and then 8 more of horn figures for the famous Stella by Starlight melody that has some playful modifications and fun rhythms to spice it up with nice harmonization between the horns. Let's check it out. Harm solos first on alto with some zippy double-time lines and nice articulation on rhythmic ideas, And Faith has an exciting piano solo, too, that gets great backing horn lines. Let's check out some of that. Back to the melody from there, and an ending of lines like the horn intro that we heard at the start. And the recording ends up with track 8, 7 Steps Blues. We heard a tune called Cross Steps from pianist Dave Hansen last week that was built off from 7 Steps to Heaven. Here we're going to step into more of a minor modal world, although the opening melody line is kind of evocative of 7 Steps to Heaven. It takes a while to build up, starting with an intro from Rob's drums and some cool horn lines that hang out on their own. The main melody has a bluesy 20-measure section and then launches into a final section. I'll let it play a bit long so you can hear the cool arrangement here. Some more horn lines get Harm launched on an incendiary alto sax solo that we need to check out on this last tune. Faith has an exciting piano solo with percussive chords, and when the horns return, they have some exciting new lines over just the drums. The horn melody starts up and works into some vamping around the final syncopated phrase for Rob to work up some excitement before the end. It's a very cool tune. But no trombone solo on this one, Robert? Aw. Anyway, this turned out to be a pleasant surprise and a nice find. Robert Cozma is a fine trombonist with a great clear singing tone, good chops and agility, and overall lyrical playing style. On top of that, he shows off his talent as a composer with attractive tunes here, mostly on the mellow side, which fits his lyrical style. Things really do heat up at the end with 7 steps blues for an exciting finish. Cozma's solos are melodic and creative, as are Harm's, with great tone and nice playing on both alto and soprano sax. Rob's drumming runs from soft and subtle to accented action depending on the mood. Kurz and Faith both round out the tight rhythm section, and they both get several enthusiastic solos. Very satisfying, and I'll definitely keep an ear out for Cozma in the future.
Yeah, this is a great sounding album with solid compositions that are a pleasure to listen to. Cozma gets great support from his band on the album. His tone fits in so well with Marcus Harms when they play the themes, and both play off each other well in solo sections. I liked Cozma's mostly melodic approach in his solos. Both Harm and Andreas Faith, as well as bassist Andreas Kurz, keep it melodic for their solos as well, and Kurz has a great sense of the melodic phrase. The album is mostly warm and pleasant evening listening, but the final track, 7 Steps Blues, takes off as the fastest track on the album, with some happening solos from the entire band. This is a well-executed album of traditional jazz, and I enjoyed the entire sound of the album as well as the playing.
Yeah, you got to keep an ear out for these European releases. All right, our next recording, Bone number 2, that's going to belong to Reggie Watkins with his recording Rivers on the BYNK label. This came out March 28th. Trombonist Reggie Watkins was born in Wheeling, West Virginia, and he's a longtime Pittsburgh resident. He's released 4 recordings as a leader, and he's appeared on many others. He was a trombonist and the musical director for Maynard Ferguson from 1999 to 2006, and then for singer-songwriter Jason Mraz from 2008 to 2013. In 2003, Watkins was a semifinalist in the Thelonious Monk International Jazz Competition. In addition to his own groups, he's also a member of the Orrin Evans Captain Black Big Band, the Pittsburgh Jazz Orchestra, and a founding member of the Keystone Jazz Collective and Steeltown Horns. His resume of other people he's worked with include artists from many styles of music: Aretha Franklin, Dave Matthews, Diane Shure, Jose Feliciano, who we mentioned last week, Willie Nelson, Arturo Sandoval, Diane Reeves, Warren Haynes, great guitarist as well. The Bandcamp notes for this recording say that the compositions reflect Watkins' deep roots in the Steel City of Pittsburgh. And I like the last paragraph of the description, quote, "As a working-class jazz musician, Reggie embodies what makes Bandcamp's artist-first philosophy so essential. This isn't music made for industry trends. It's honest, unfiltered jazz that connects deeply with both the past and the present." On the recording, Reggie Watkins on the trombone and all original compositions, Michael Burnaby on piano, Eli Naragon on bass, and Jason Washington Jr. on the drums. It was recorded February 12, 2024 at the Vault Studio in Pittsburgh. Recording engineer Jimmy Hoyson, assistant recording engineer Brian Ammon. Mixed and mastered by Dave Darlington at Bass Hit Studio in New York. Producers are Matt Parker and Reggie Watkins. We're going to get underway with Blues in 3D, which the notes say is a tribute to modern trombone greats. This has a free-flowing opening section with improvisations from Watkins. Things firm up on a riffy, rhythmic, melodic line to a cute cadence, and then it's off on a 12-bar blues melody. Let's check it out. Yeah, and Watkins is off on improvisations that mix up cool bluesy riffs and tension-building spots. Let's jump back in and hear some more of his playing. Fun weaving in and out there. Burnaby's up next with a super swinging piano solo that mixes in some hard-hitting chords, and Watkins is back for some trading choruses with Washington on the drums and wraps it up with a couple final times through the melody. Track 2 is Waiting. This starts with a tension-building, tricky rhythm section figure. Watkins has some lines on top, and then it subsides into a relaxed space. As the flowing trombone melody lines move along, a sort of samba feel develops until that crazy rhythmic figure returns and the melody section repeats. It's all pretty cool. Watkins will continue on with improvisations. I like his sense of phrasing and space between ideas, ending in a final sliding cry. Let's hear that final cry into some tasty piano from Burnaby. That crazy figure back into a final flowing trombone melody section, and the figure ends things up. Track 3, Ritual, a modal post-bop kind of spiritual vibe, gets set up here with a harmonic cycle on the 16-measure intro. Nice cymbal work and drum fills from Washington. Piano and trombone work the melody together. It's in an AAB structure with 14-measure A sections and a very neat contrasting B with bass and drums stopping up. Watkins is off, improvising from there, building a nice arc and climax. Burnaby follows on piano with an exciting solo, and Narragon has some super bounce in his bass lines. Washington gets an impactful short drum solo before the final melody section is back to finish things up. Track 4, Dawn of Peace. This has a folk-like catchy piano lick in the 16-measure intro with a pentatonic focus and a 3/4 meter. The muted lyrical trombone melody and harmonies make a dreamy, peaceful mood. I like how the first section of melody returns to the piano lick before moving on. Watkins keeps the dreamy mood in his solo lines, but Burnaby's solo on the piano is more rhythmically insistent, and bass and drums work up the intensity. It suddenly resets to the intro idea in a relaxed fashion, and Watkins is back with the folky melody into more improvised ideas. The rhythm section takes it to a quietening and chilled ending with softly ringing high bass notes from Narragon. Track 5 is Meditation. This starts with an open space over sustained bass, sparse piano, and light drum decoration. Watkins enters with an unhurried trombone line that reaches longingly higher and higher. There's a primal serenity to the mood. Let's hear from where the trombone enters about 30 seconds in. Meditation reaches a kind of satori with pretty rippling piano from Burnaby and more drum energy before subsiding to a peaceful ending. Track 6, Ocularity. Tricky, angular, and unpredictable describe the melody here, worked together skillfully by trombone, piano, and bass with punctuations and fills from Washington. The bass switching to a one-note bounce and then walking is really cool. Keep your ear on the phrase lengths and harmonic changes, and you'll figure out that it's 4 times through a 12-bar blues progression, which is how it will go for the solos. Watkins continues on with blues choruses. Burnaby follows on piano, getting into some jumpy chord excitement, and Watkins is back to trade choruses with Washington. Let's hear some of that interaction. To the tricky melody to wrap things up. Track 7 is Hide and Seek. There's a 16-measure intro with easygoing syncopated piano chord and bass figures filled out with tasty drums from Washington. We'll hear that idea under the trombone melody when it comes in. The melody is a repeating 12-measure idea with nice integration of piano ideas. It switches up to a walking bass for Watkins to begin improvisation. Let's hear it from where the trombone enters. Relaxed swinging feel, and what I like here is Washington's response on the drums to the rhythmic ideas in Watkins' improvised lines. Let's check some of that out. picking up from there with a really excellent piano solo. And when they get back to the melody, they break it up, giving Washington sections to take solo spots on the drums. Track 8 is Wizards. This starts out with a light, clicky straight beat and syncopated bass and piano chords that push it ahead on the 16-measure intro. Very nice piano decoration from Burnaby, too. Watkins comes in on the 26-measure melody, and it changes up to a swing over walking bass on the way before returning to the syncopated idea from the intro. Going around again from there, with Watkins getting into improvised ideas early on, the walking bass is back for the rest of his solo with some snappy variations. Let's hear Burnaby's solo on this tune. Really snappy and really cool fills between the syncopated chords at the end there. Watkins is back with the melody and embellishments. The last phrase gets repeats, building up the tension to a final high trombone note. Track 9 is Dream Walker Intro. This is a solo bass intro from Narragon. It has some cool glisses and bent notes. I'll leave it to you to check out on your own. And track 10 is Dreamwalker, which is dedicated to Reggie's father, the notes say. This will get you in a dreamy state with a cool 4-measure ostinato bass pattern that gets joined by Burnaby's left hand and a light clicky beat. Let's hear it into the first 16-measure melody section. That goes around again, and it finishes up with a short contrasting 7-measure section before Burnaby is off to a light-touched start on a solo. Watkins has a really sassy solo with agile slide work next, but let's check out Narragon's bass solo on this tune. melodic ideas and rhythmic feel. And Watkins is back from there with the final melody section. Track 11 is Rivers, the title track. The notes say it was inspired by Sam Rivers, the saxophonist and multi-instrumentalist, and this tune is dedicated to Watkins's mother. This gets started with an 8-measure rhythm section intro with delicate piano from Burnaby. Notice how it's in 5/8 time, a 1-2-3-1-2 feel, but it switches up to 6/8 when Watkins enters with the muted melody. It's a repeating 12-measure theme, and the 5/8 meter returns in the 8th and 10th bars. Tricky and really neat. The 5/8 intro idea returns with a long note from Watkins before getting into his solo with the rhythmic switch-ups continuing. He makes it flow nicely with smooth phrasing. Let's hear some more. Burnaby follows from there with a solo, and Watkins is back for a couple more times around the melody with some more improvised ideas. The rhythm section keeps flowing on with a soft vamp to a quiet ending. Track 12 is Blues 6. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro, and then, as the title indicates, we've got a 6-beat 12-bar blues. They go around the customary 2 times, and then Watkins is off soloing. It sounds really neat with walking bass over a 6-beat rhythm. I'll give you an extra long sample that gets into the solo. Burnaby and Narragon get to play the blues in 6/2 before they get back to the melody once again. And the recording ends up with track 13, Shanghai Strut. This has a cute melody and infectious bass ostinato and a rhythm that will give you a smile. The rhythm section goes around the whole 24-measure form, so let's jump in from the muted trombone melody that has some tricky interval jumps and tasty fills from Burnaby. Watkins continues on with improvisations, and he keeps it melodically simple. Burnaby has a tasty short solo before Watkins is back with some more improvisations and agile slide work. It ends up with trombone joining in on the bass and piano ostinato figures. And that's the recording. This was great. Watkins' original compositions keep you entertained and interested with catchy melodies and variety. We get post-bop modal ideas, blues, mixes of straight beats and swing with switching meters, and even some spiritual sense on a couple of tunes. It's not easy to be the only horn as a brass player, but Watkins' chops are always solid through the melody lines and continue on into inventive solos with great phrasing. Burnaby has tasteful backing and his own inventive solos throughout, and Narragon and Washington lock in on all sorts of grooves with their own unique personalities coming out in their solo spots. I'm sure I'll keep coming back to this recording a lot in the future.
Yeah, I heard a lot of creative structures on this album, and what caught my ear were the exciting, engaging ways in which the band handled those structures, going through these different sort of changes within the rhythm and melody. The trombone bats lead off in most of the solos, and I liked Watkins' melodic, appealing way, even over trickier chord and rhythm patterns.
Very smooth, yeah.
Yeah, he's got a different approach in each track, showing a deep well of creative ideas, too. I especially like the push and pull, ebb and flow quality of the theme he plays with the mute on the title track. And Jason Washington Jr. steps out quite a bit on this album on the drums, soloing on many tracks. Eli Narragon on bass keeps to anchoring the tracks, stepping out to solo only on the later tracks. It was pretty interesting. He just kind of hung back at the beginning. And Michael Burnaby is a fine foil to Watkins' solos, often playing quietly and with appealing tone and phrases. It's an album that keeps the mind engaged while giving the ear some appealing themes and turns of phrase in solos.
Yeah, great stuff. And one more bone to pick with you all.
That's a good title, too.
Bone to pick, yeah.
Bones to pick. God, I got to write that down.
And this one is from Altin Sencalar, Unleashed on Posi-Tone Records. It came out March 28th. Altin Sencalar has degrees from the University of Texas at Austin and Michigan State University. He's also taught at Michigan State, and he's played with a lot of big jazz names like Dee Dee Bridgewater, Rodney Whitaker, Christian McBride, and Ulysses Owens Jr. We've been following him since his Posi-Tone debut.
Yeah, he's an adult music favorite.
Yes. Starting out in episode 120, Saxifying Memories from June of 2023. That was his recording In Good Standing on Posi-Tone. And then again in episode 159, The Devil's Bones from April of last year. That was his recording Discover the Present, also on Posi-Tone. And Altin follows adult music on Podbean and Facebook, and he gives us some likes on our posts sometimes. So thanks for your support, Altin. On this recording, the lineup is Altin Sencalar on trombone, Greg Tardy on tenor sax and clarinet. We heard his clarinet recording back in episode 143, Elegant Wandering. The recording was called In His Timing. It was a self-release and very nice clarinet and also violin work on that. Check that out. We've got Bruce Williams on flute, and alto sax and soprano sax. Ben Gillis on vibraphone setting the mood on this recording. We heard his recordings Stick Together on Posi-Tone back in episode 163 called Theater of Music.
Yeah, I've got that one too.
That came out in April of last year. And we've got Boris Kozlov, probably the most heard bassist on adult music on all those great Posi-Tone releases. And on drums, the hard-hitting E.J. Strickland. As always, the team at Posi-Tone is Mark Free on production and Nick O'Toole, engineer. This was recorded June 7th, 2024 at Acoustic Recording in Brooklyn. Mike, mixed and mastered at Woodland Studio, Lake Oswego, Oregon.
Yeah, my hometown.
Yeah.
Brooklyn.
We're going to get underway with the title track, an Altin Sencalar original, Unleashed. Gillis sets a dreamy intro mood with a solo rubato vibes start. Don't chill out too much, though, because Vibes trombone and Tardy's tenor are in on the pickup to a furiously swinging melody. It sounds like two similar 16-measure halves, and Sencalar is unleashed into a solo burning up the slide grease. Let's hear this get started. It just doesn't seem right to stop here, so I think we'll just continue on and hear the rest of this solo. I love that one low note that's plopped right in the middle of there, too. Altin Sencalar has a really good sense of humor in his playing. Ben Gillis follows from there, letting the mallets fly with a lot of ideas, and Tardy gets a solo, too, with fine, fluttery explorations, and Strickland gets a hard-hitting drum solo section into a final round of the melody. This is a super high-energy start to the recording. Track 2, also a Sencalar original, Obsession. The energy stays cranked up for this one, with a cool repeating vibes and bass riff in the 8-measure intro. The melody is 28 measures, including a 4-measure return to the riff, and keeps surprising with syncopation and sax and trombone weaving in interesting ways with little breaks. Let's check this out. nice, and Tardy's up first for a solo here, so let's check out his playing on this tune. Cool serpentine-like phrases. Sencalar follows with snappy phrases and interesting rhythmic ideas, and a couple more of those cool low notes in there. The driving beat falls away for Gilles to get started on a solo, and I like his control of the sustain here for clear articulation on speedy lines, while letting some of the chords ring out more. The horns take it through the melody again with final phrase repeats and some thunder from Strickland's drums to the end. Track 3, also a Sencalar original, Forgiveness. Ringing vibes and bowed bass from Kozlov make an intro section with rising trombone lines floating up in waves. After a pause, the super sunny trombone and sax melody gets going over lightly bouncing bass lines. It's in an ABA shape with 16 measure sections. Let's hear it get started. Comes back to the A section, Tardy goes off on some really fun meandering lines, and Sencalar solos first with a relaxed feel, but some playful pitch slides, and Tardy matches the mood with a melodic and playful tenor sax solo too. Let's check out Gilles' vibe solo on this one. Are back there from the B section to the end with some final bowed bass from Kozlov. Track 4 is a Gilles original, Set Adrift. This tune has ringing vibe and bass chords that kind of mark out sax and trombone phrases that come in 16 and then 18 measure sections. It takes a long time to play out, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to sample Sencalar's solo on this one. Some really impressive agility on that solo. Gilles has a solo that takes time to build up excitement, and that's with the help of Strickland, and Sencalar has some final improvised ideas after the ending melody section. Track 5 is an Eric Dolphy tune, 17 West. This is from his 1960 recording Out There. I remember this record. We don't get to listen to these old albums so much because we're always checking out new releases.
Yeah.
Gilles and Tardy lock in on the opening riff, and Strickland adds some pizzazz on the snare. Sencalar and Tardy on clarinet take the dizzy Dolphy melody together that becomes an altered 12-bar blues idea, and then Tardy is off on a clarinet solo. He has a thick tone in the lower register and then works it up high. I'll give you a sample to get into his solo. Gilles has an exciting solo too, but we really have to hear what Sencalar does on this tune. Goes on, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was a solo that stood out for me as well.
I had to play the sample for that one. Strickland has a little drum section before the horns are back with an ending melody section. Track 6 is a Michael Deese tune, Solid Gold, Ringing vibes and busy bass lines make a 16-measure intro. Sencalar takes the first 16-measure section of the melody that is filled with tricky figures that repeats with tardy joining in and adding some harmony, and it works into a longer ending section and a final trombone figure. Let's hear it get going. Sencalar and Tardi both have exciting solos. In Galice's solo, there are rhythmic breaks, and then Strickland's groove transformation and drumming is really great. Let's check out a little bit of that. Another time around the melody, and some final ideas from Sencalar at the ending. Track 7, another Sencalar original composition, Buenaventura. A Latin mood for this one, and the horn arrangement with Tardi's clarinet and Bruce Williams on flute is really fine. Let's hear this one get going. Nice arrangement. Sencalar has a charming solo with tasteful dynamic contrast in his lines. Tardi gets a go on clarinet, and Galice has a vibe solo before the final horn melody with a nice ending by Sencalar. Track 8 is a John Coltrane tune, Straight Street. This is from 1957's Coltrane on Prestige. A nice arrangement here too, with vibes and trombone working the intro riff together. Williams is on alto sax here, and the two saxes have car horn-like syncopated hits over the bone and vibes. Tardi gets around on the main melody first, and then hands it off to Williams. Williams will continue on for an alto solo, so let's check out some of his playing. Takes over from there. You heard Williams quote a lick from Gershwin's fascinating rhythm in his solo, and Sencalar remembers that and works it into his solo lines later on as well. And it finishes up with another run through the melody, and the rhythmic opening idea works for an outro as well. Track 9, Softly as in a Morning Sunrise, a tune by Sigmund Romberg that goes all the way back to 1928. The cool horn arranging continues with a new original intro idea for this old standard. Williams is on soprano sax for this one. The harmonized line ideas are unique. Off soloing first on soprano there. Sencalar's solo on this one will make you smile with some funny bottoming out notes after a lot of tricky slide work, and Gillis has the final solo over some great chugging lines from Kozlov. And the recording ends up with a final Sencalar original, What's Next? This has a great kind of cruising drum groove from Strickland, back to just Tardy's tenor and Sencalar's trombone for the melody on this one. It's a 32-measure idea with a more static first half and then more harmonic changes in the second part. Let's take a listen. After that 8-measure interlude there, they take it around the melody once again. Sencalar has some super speedy licks at the end of his solo, and Tardy gets some soulful passion on tenor sax. I didn't think they would leave Boris Kozlov out of a chance for playing a solo, and he gets his spot here, so let's check it out on this final tune. Back to a final time around the melody, and then a soft, slowed ending of repeated note horn phrases over bowed bass to finish up the album. Altin Sencalar is definitely one of the most exciting trombone players out there today. He has a big, edgy sound with great chops and agility, and his improvised solos are always inventive and often show a playful sense of humor. The program here has 5 of his original compositions with a lot of variety, as well as one from Gillis, one from Michael Deese, one reimagined standard, and 2 covers of tunes by masters of the past, Coltrane and Dolphy. That's a nice mix. What also stands out on this recording is the instrumentation, with Ben Gillis's vibes taking the chordal role, and that adds a lot of atmosphere. When he works the melody lines with trombone, the combination of tones is unique too. Tardy's tenor and clarinet add another individual solo voice, as does the variety with Williams's flute, alto, and soprano sax. The arrangements with multiple horns are well thought out and entertaining too. Gillis's solos always keep your interest, and the hard-hitting Strickland catches your ear throughout with great grooves and fills, and he locks in well with the always solid Boris Kozlov. Appropriately, Sencalar's last track is My Only Question. What's next?
I like Sencalar's light, virtuosic, and occasionally humorous approach, as you pointed out. You get the sense that he knows he's good, but doesn't take himself too seriously. And I always feel invited into his albums. And, you know, I was doing my jazz collection. I have a lot of his albums now. I didn't even realize it because they had been scattered around. Now they're all together on the shelf. And I'll have to get this one, too. It's going to have to go up there as well. I really liked Sencalar's humor in the very low notes he plays on 17 West, which you sampled. That was inevitable, I think. It was really special. The presence of Ben Gillis on this album makes it even better. His chiming, rounded tone on the vibes make him a good foil for Sencalar, and he's always a pleasure to hear. We heard him on that Stick Together album last year. Just great to hear him again. He's got a great tone. We even get some clarinet from Greg Tardy on 2 tracks, making for some timbral variation, and some pretty aggressive drumming throughout by E.J. Strickland, propelling these tracks hard. Yeah, this is another appealing jazz album with great performances by the band.
Yeah, another great Posi-Tone release. All right, that's going to wrap it up for bluesiness and lots of bones for this episode. And we've got our menu lined up for next week's episode 208 already. So what's on the classical side of the buffet, Mike?
Okay, so in Baroque music, we've got some pretty obscure concertos for Baroque lute that I'm looking forward to hearing. I like the lute, you know. This is by Miguel Rincon and Il Pomodoro, an ensemble that we both really like a lot. We have the pianist Behzad Abduraimov, who we heard in Shadows of My Ancestors, one of our albums of the year.
Yeah, that was a great one.
2 years ago, I believe. Yeah, and this is his new album of Prokofiev and Alexei Shur piano concerto. So he's got one contemporary composer up there with Prokofiev's second piano concerto, which is my personal favorite one, so I'm looking forward to hearing him play that. The contemporary composer next week is Erilyn Wallen, an album of her orchestral works. So I'm curious to hear that, because I've only heard like one piece here, one piece there by her, and I'm curious to hear like a whole set of them. This will give me a good idea of what she does.
That'd be a new discovery.
Right.
On the jazz side, we've got a lot of variety. We're going to start out with a German pianist, Christian Pabst, with a piano trio recording called Rhythm Riot on Jazz Sick Records. That just came out April 4th. Then we're going to stay in the trio format with an organ trio. It's a debut recording as a leader from Mitch Town. It's called Refuge. That came out April 1st. And then we're going to do a live recording from drummer Leon Anderson as the leader, live at Snug Harbor, and that's on Outside in Music. That came out April 4th too. So all fresh stuff. If you want to check out those recordings during the week, I'll have this playlist with all the classical and jazz recordings in one place on our Deezer playlist, and there'll be a link to it posted on our Facebook page as well. Thanks as always to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo, and we'll be back again next week with episode 208. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.